Okay, I am convinced that if Samara Weaving is in a movie, and if there is a point in the film where she is covered in blood, well, we're in for a pretty damn good time. Now, in today's video, we're talking about a film that completely caught me off guard. And here's my pitch to you all as far as things that I was thinking of while watching this movie. What if you had peak Walking Dead meets A Quiet Place and has the brutality of one of my favorite horror films of all time by the name of The Descent? Well, that's what this film kind of reminded me of. But the question is this movie any good? Is it worth checking out? Well, we'll be discussing that and much more in today's spoiler-free review of Azrael. But first, let's get the conversation going in the comments below. This movie will be coming to theaters on September 27th and will be streaming on Shudder later in October. So do you all plan on checking it out? But more importantly, once you've seen it, what did you all think? What did you like, love, or hate about this movie? And also, let me know some of your favorite horror films that you have seen so far this year. Let's talk about it all in the comments below. So I had heard some rumblings about this movie when it premiered at South by Southwest earlier this year. And the only thing I knew about it was Samara Weaving was in the movie. And look, I'm a big fan of hers, whether it be her in Babysitter 1, not the biggest fan of Part 2. She was great in Mayhem. She was great in her limited screen time in Scream 6. And of course, my personal favorite is Ready or Not. So big fan of hers. I think she is the best final girl, the best scream queen in modern horror films to date. So I was excited to see her in a new horror movie. And I'm just going to say this right now. Let's just get this out of the way. I thoroughly enjoyed this movie. Now, it does have its criticisms, some flaws that we'll be talking about in today's review, but I just want to let y'all know this was my type of movie. So for those that aren't too familiar with this movie's all about, basically years after the rapture, we see the world where no one speaks, and this story follows this leader of this cult community who hunts down a young woman who has escaped imprisonment. After she's recaptured, the young lady is due to be sacrificed to an ancient evil in the wilderness, but fights for her own survival. All right, so let's talk about the director of this film first, who goes by the name of E.L. Katz. Now, I have not seen a film of his. This is my first film of watching of his, and I gotta say right now, after watching this, I'm a fan. Earlier, I had mentioned how this film reminded me of A Quiet Place. That's because this film doesn't have any dialogue for about 99% of the runtime. And for a movie that doesn't rely on dialogue, it still manages to keep you invested and engaged in its narrative the entire time. Besides the first 3 to 5 minutes of this film, this was a balls to the wall, non-stop, incredibly tense, suspense-filled, nerve-inducing action horror film that doesn't take its foot off the pedal. Not once did I ever find myself bored or uninterested in what was going on in the movie, and there are points of this film when we are roaming through the woods, we're walking through the woods, but yet it still has you on the edge of your seat because of what's in the woods, whether it's the people trying to catch our main character or these demonic demons. The way the director hooks you in and keeps you guessing what's going to happen next, and things just kept escalating further and further into this bloody madness. It was just so insane. I thought the direction was just so great from this director. I love the production of this film. Like, for its budget, number one, it looked amazing, and for the fact that all of this movie takes place in the woods and the way they were able to manage to make you feel scared, not only in the nighttime scenes, but you were just as scared in the daytime scenes. I thought that the score was fantastic. The sound design, the sound effects in this film was just so well put together. And also, shout out to the crew for using practical effects. The gorier elements of this film were incredible and just looked amazing. Also really enjoyed the look and feel of this aesthetic of this Mad Max meets Last of Us type of apocalyptic world that was created for this film. Now, I have to take a moment to show some appreciation again to the crew and the production team of putting together some incredible looking creatures. To me, the design was kind of a mix of the demon from Insidious meets the walkers of The Walking Dead, mixed with a little bit of the similarity of the designs from The Descent. And just speaking of the creatures themselves, they were absolutely terrifying every time they appeared on screen. The film uses these demonic creatures in such a smart way as you learn new things about them every time they appear. Like, they almost come off like they're vampire demons, and they are just relentless and just incredibly brutal. Now, to the point of the brutality, I gotta talk about this real quick. This film does not hold back. Like, this is a bloody, brutal movie. It kind of had shades of, I'm thinking of all these things that it reminded me of. Like, it has the action horror beats of like an Evil Dead franchise, and what I mean by that is, It may be a little bit over the top of when you're seeing the brutality, but I mean, we got limbs being ripped off, heads being ripped off, blood everywhere. Like, I loved all the blood. Again, the practicality was so perfect. I love the action horror in this film. Like, it was just such a damn good time. But without an anchor leading the way and having someone that you can root for and care about and sell the action and the thrills, you have to have a badass final girl, and that is Samara Weaving. She completely sells the idea of not having any dialogue in this film because she's so expressive and she has such charisma, and you buy her character's actions along the way. By no means is this character perfect. Like, she makes mistakes in this film, but she wills her way throughout different scenarios throughout this entire movie, and she is just so believable in every aspect. Again, whenever her character is forced to survive this crazy situation, Samara Weaving, with any weapon in her hands, is so dangerous. She is just generations Ripley or Sarah Connor. She is just so incredible in these type of roles. Now, last point I want to mention, this film is very effective in its runtime. Like, it is so fast-paced. It comes in under 90 minutes. And for me personally, I would have stayed in this world for like another 2 hours. But again, it's a very effective, quick runtime. And then one more thing I want to talk about, and this is no spoilers. You won't have any context of what this means, but once you see the film, you'll understand it. But all I'll say is, as it pertains to my favorite scenes in this film, I'll just say the car scene, the church scene, there's a scene that involves rope, and then the last 20 minutes are exhilarating and has some incredible payoffs. Now, those are my main pros, transitioning into things that just kept this movie from being like absolutely a perfect horror film as I talk about my criticisms here. Now, of course, when you get into a horror film, you're going to come across some things like silly characters making silly decisions, and it doesn't take me out of the movie, but it's just like, well, that was very convenient. Or you have like that scene very manufactured in order to keep the movie moving along, but it doesn't really make sense in the context of the scene. So again, little nitpicks there. But my real criticisms, number one, I mentioned Samara Weaving. She is impeccable. Like, if she doesn't give the performance she does, this movie does not work at all. So she's great. Unfortunately, the supporting cast, now I'll be honest, they weren't given as much as Samara, so they're limited as far as the material they're given. And also, that's something I'll talk about also. The story is not that elaborate. But putting that aside, even when you're not given a lot, you still can have a performance that breathes life or adds something new to the dynamic of the characters. But I felt like a lot of, outside of Samara, everyone else was just bland and just kind of moving through the motions. So I thought the supporting characters were just kind of generic, if I'm being honest. But the biggest issue that I can see a lot of people having, I have kind of accepted some of the shortcomings in the story, but I can still acknowledge that the story is very paper thin. Now, it's unfortunate because I can appreciate the risk that it takes, but this is a very matter-of-fact type of movie. Now, what I mean by that is the film doesn't have much of any dialogue, and when there is dialogue, it's in another language, so you don't understand what the person's saying. So with that lack of dialogue, there isn't a lot of explaining going on. Like, they don't really explore how many years has this world been the way that it is. It doesn't really get into certain decisions that are made into why aren't these people being able to speak and who chose this particular rule. We have this cult in this film that clearly has a relationship with the main character that's really never explored. And there's just a ton of things that aren't explained and not told to the audience, which can be frustrating at times, and you're not given a lot of information that's kept from the story. Now, to be fair, the film does take moments in the film where they put like Bible scriptures on the screen to kind of explain the current situation the characters are finding themselves in, but also explain the world that they're in. So that they're giving you like breadcrumbs in this. Without spoiling anything, there's also like this church element of the film where there's a particular woman in the movie that's pregnant, and you get the illusion that she's able to speak to the evil in the world, and they have like an agreement. And I'll just kind of leave it at that. But again, that's just assuming, right? Like, this is, if I'm not a super religious person, but I grew up in the church. So this is very much like taking the blueprint of like Revelations, right? And there's a lot of like antichrist type of messaging going on. And again, me knowing certain things, I was able to fill in some of the blanks, but you shouldn't have to have your audience making a ton of assumptions, and there's a lot of assumptions happening in this movie. Again, I was able to fill some things in, but that doesn't mean I'm right or wrong. So it's just like, I wish the story was just more fleshed out. Now, last thing I want to mention, I love the ending of this film, but there's a particular shootout that happens in the third act that it wasn't bad, but compared to all the other action, the brutality and the gore, it was just kind of generic and just seemed, I don't want to say out of place, but it just didn't fit with all the other craziness that was going on in the third act. So those are my main pros, those are my cons. Before I give you all my overall score, I want to take this time to thank you all for making it to this point in the video. If you've enjoyed yourself so far, make sure you're hitting that thumbs up. Also, leave your thoughts in the comments below and consider sticking around by subscribing to the channel. Overall, like I said up top, I've learned my lesson that if Samara Weaving is covered in blood in the movie, it is destined to be an instant classic. The director's bold approach to remove most of the dialogue can be frustrating at times, especially with the lack of story and explanations given to the audience and not really dive into certain elements of this film. But even with that, the director still manages to have such pleasing payoffs by the end of this film. Again, Samara Weaving has maintained her position as a modern-day scream queen by exhibiting her relentless characteristics and bringing such physicality to her role. Very much like Ready or Not, her portrayal of her primal instincts to survive is brought to life by her raw emotions. This film captures suspense and tension in the best way possible, and it is beautifully well crafted and extremely bloody, all within 90 minutes. With its great direction and a great horror icon as the lead, what else could you ask for? This to me is personally my favorite horror film of the year, and even with my criticisms, with the things that it was lacking, I thought that all the good made up for the shortcomings, and I was thoroughly entertained from beginning to the end. I'm going to give this movie a solid 4 out of 5. Now, like I said, this is my personal favorite horror film. That doesn't mean it's the best horror film or it's the greatest horror film, but for what I like in an action horror, this did an excellent job of keeping me entertained. And again, it's bloody, it's gory, it has a great performance by our main lead. It has some interesting concepts. Again, it would have been a 5 out of 5. I would have said it's the perfect horror film of this year if it would have really fleshed out the story. But again, even with that, it's my personal favorite horror action film of the year. So that's just my thoughts on this film. I want to know yours in the comments below. Again, it will be coming to theaters on September 27th, but we'll have a streaming release later in October. I don't know if there's been an official release date on Shudder. So I recommend you all check this out, and when you do, I want to talk to you all about everything that transpires, favorite moments, favorite scenes, what things didn't work for you all, how did you feel about the lack of the explanation within the story, and what did you all think about the ending? Let's talk about it all in the comments below. Thank you all for watching today's review. You all are awesome. Stay safe. A lot of stuff coming pretty soon with spooky season, so keep an eye out for that. I'll catch you all on the next video.